Some folks spend their whole lives waiting for someone to keep just one promise. Elena Martinez had stopped believing in promises the day they buried her husband in the hard clay behind Silver Falls Only Church. Then one evening, as she sat mending bandages by lamplight, Jacob Stone filled her doorway like a mountain come to call. The quiet cowboy who broke wild horses and kept to the ridges had never said more than, "Much obliged" to her before. But tonight he stood there, hat in his weathered hands, and spoke 7 words that would change everything. "I'll build you a home, and you'll give me a family." Most women would have laughed at such bold talk from a stranger, but something in his steady gray eyes told Elena this wasn't just talk. What would drive a man to offer everything to a woman who thought she had nothing left to give? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because we've got something extra special coming your way. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Falls' dusty Main Street. Elena Martinez stepped out of her clinic behind Murphy's Saloon, her worn boots crunching on parched earth that hadn't seen proper rain in 2 seasons. The town bore the scars of drought and hardship, peeling paint, sagging porches, and the hollow-eyed look of folks who'd learned not to hope too much. Her clinic occupied what had once been a storage room, barely large enough for 2 cots and a table where she kept her medicines. Elena touched the simple gold band on her finger, a habit she'd never broken in the 3 years since Miguel died. She'd been 24 when she married, full of plans for the family they'd build together. The fever that took him had nearly claimed her too, leaving her barren and alone. "Morning, Elena." Rosa Chen emerged from the saloon's back door, carrying steaming coffee. The Chinese woman had arrived in Silver Fall 5 years ago, with enough gold to buy Murphy's establishment outright. "We had an unusual visitor asking after you last night." Elena's stomach tightened. "Who?" "Jacob Stone." Everyone knew of Jacob Stone, the giant who lived in the high country, breaking horses that other men couldn't touch. He'd drift into town maybe twice a year for supplies, speaking only when spoken to. "What did he want?" "Didn't say. Just asked when you'd be working, then left quiet as he came." Rosa studied Elena's face. That man's got something on his mind. Before Elena could respond, a commotion erupted from the general store. Old Pete was arguing with a well-dressed stranger, whose clean clothes marked him as surely as if he'd worn a sign. "Drought's got this whole territory by the throat," the stranger was saying. "Smart folks are selling while they still can." "Ain't interested, mister," Pete replied stubbornly. "Samuel Garrett's the name, and I represent interests that could turn this dying town into something prosperous." Elena exchanged glances with Rosa. They'd both seen his type before, men who arrived with smooth words and hidden intentions. By midday, the heat had driven most folks indoors. Elena was organizing her medicine bottles when heavy boots sounded on the wooden steps outside. The door opened, and Jacob Stone had to duck his head to enter. In daylight, he seemed even larger. His shoulders filled the doorframe, and he moved with the careful control of a man aware of his own strength. His dark hair was held back by a leather thong, and his face bore the deep tan of someone who spent days under the open sky. "Ma'am," his voice was deep with a slight rasp. "Hope I'm not disturbing your work." "Not at all." Elena set down her bottle. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, gray eyes never leaving her face. "Came to apologize for last night. Speaking out of turn like that." "You spoke plainly. Some might call it refreshing." "Been thinking about what you said, about having nothing to give." "It's the truth. I'm barren, Mr. Stone." The fever saw to that. "Family isn't just blood." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small. It was a wooden horse, no bigger than her thumb, carved with intricate detail. The mane flowed like captured wind, and the eyes held a spark of life that seemed impossible in mere wood. "Made this while I was thinking on your words." Elena stared at the tiny sculpture. "It's beautiful. My pa taught me to work with wood, said a man's hands should create as well as labor." His thumb traced the horse's mane. "I've been making these for years, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, telling myself someday I'd have a child to give them to." The ache in his voice made her chest tight. "Maybe family is what we make it," he continued. "Maybe it's about 2 people choosing to stand together against whatever comes." "You don't know me," she whispered. I know you stay up all night with the sick, taking no payment but gratitude. I know you've got gentle hands and a strong heart. His voice grew softer. I know you wear your wedding ring like armor. Her hand moved instinctively to cover the gold band. I'm not asking you to forget your husband. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe we both deserve something better than being alone. Where would you build this home? She heard herself ask. There's a place up on Eagles Ridge, about 5 miles north of town. Good water, timber for building. His eyes held hers. Been waiting for the right reason to start. He extended the wooden horse toward her. This is yours, whatever you decide. Elena hesitated, then reached out to take the tiny carving. Their fingers brushed, and she felt calluses earned by honest work. Thank you, she managed. Jacob nodded and settled his hat back on his head. I'll be starting on that house come morning, Mrs. Martinez. Not because I expect anything, but because a promise made is a debt unpaid. After he left, Elena sat in her empty clinic, turning the wooden horse over in her hands. She could see the hours of patient work in every curve, the love carved into something meant to be given away. But what Jacob Stone didn't know was that promises had a way of turning dangerous in this territory, and some men would kill to make sure certain promises were never kept. For the first time in 3 years, Elena Martinez found herself caught between the safety of solitude and the terrifying possibility of hope. Change was coming, and she had no idea that accepting one wooden horse would put her directly in the crosshairs of the most dangerous man in the territory. 3 days after Jacob's visit, Elena found herself riding the old mare she kept behind the clinic toward Eagles Ridge. She told herself she was simply taking advantage of the cooler morning air, but the wooden horse in her pocket seemed to pulse with each step of the journey. The trail wound upward through scrub oak and juniper, past weathered rock formations that had stood sentinel over the valley for countless years. As she crested the final ridge, Elena pulled up short. Below her, in a natural clearing sheltered by tall pines, Jacob Stone was laying the foundation of a house. He'd chosen his spot well. A spring bubbled up from between the rocks, feeding a small creek that would provide fresh water year-round. The clearing faced east to catch the morning sun, while the surrounding trees would offer shade during the brutal afternoon heat. It was the kind of place that spoke of home in ways that had nothing to do with walls and roofs. Jacob looked up from his work, sweat gleaming on his broad shoulders. He'd stripped down to his undershirt and work pants, revealing arms corded with muscle from years of handling wild horses. A pile of carefully cut stones lay beside him, each one fitted with the precision of someone who understood that a foundation must be built to last. Mrs. Martinez, he straightened, reaching for his shirt, didn't expect to see you up this way. I wanted to see what kind of foundation a man builds for his promises. Elena dismounted, tying her mare to a nearby pine. The land deed lay weighted down by a stone on a makeshift table of planks stretched between 2 stumps. She could see Jacob's name written in careful script, along with coordinates and boundaries that made this dream legally his. Figured I'd start with the important parts. Jacob gestured to the stonework. Foundation's got to be solid, or nothing built on it will stand. Learned that from my father, and he learned it from his. Elena walked closer, admiring the precise fit of the stones. How long will it take? Done right? Most of a year, working alone. He knelt back down, positioning another foundation stone. Could go faster with help, but I'm not rushing this. A home built in haste is likely to fall in the first strong wind. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. Samuel Garrett rode into the clearing on a fine bay horse, flanked by 2 men whose guns rode loose in their holsters. His smile was pleasant enough, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well now, this is quite the enterprise. Garrett dismounted, his gaze taking in the foundation work and the land deed. Asher Boone, isn't it? I've heard interesting things about you, Mr. Stone. This is private property, Jacob said quietly, though Elena noticed how his hand moved closer to the hammer at his belt. Of course, I'm not here to cause trouble. Garrett's attention shifted to Elena. Mrs. Martinez, a pleasure to see you again. I trust you're well? Something in his tone made her skin crawl. Well enough. Excellent. I was just telling Mr. Stone here that I'm always interested in acquiring promising land in this area. This particular parcel, Eagles Ridge has quite a history. What kind of history? Elena asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Garrett's smile widened. Why? It's where the Apache used to send their war parties before raiding the valley. Some say the spirits of dead warriors still walk these ridges at night. Of course, that's just superstition. The real concern is the practical matter of water rights and grazing access. Water rights are clear on the deed, Jacob said quietly. Surveyed and recorded proper. Deeds can be challenged, my friend, especially when there are questions about the original survey. Garrett pulled out a folded paper from his coat. I've had my own surveyors take a look, and there seem to be some discrepancies. Nothing that couldn't be resolved amicably, of course. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She'd seen this pattern before. Men like Garrett used legal complications the way others use guns, wearing down their targets until surrender seemed easier than fighting. The survey is accurate, Jacob said. Had it verified by the territorial office before I bought the land. Territorial offices make mistakes. Clerks can be careless. Records can be misfiled. Garrett's tone remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. I'd hate to see you invest all this work in a foundation that might not be yours to build on. One of Garrett's men, a lean scarecrow with dead eyes, let his coat fall open to reveal a silver-plated revolver. The gesture seemed casual, but Elena caught the deliberate intent. On the other hand, Garrett continued, I'm prepared to offer fair compensation for your trouble. Say twice what you paid for the land. You could buy a nice spread somewhere else, start fresh without all these legal complications. Jacob straightened to his full height, and suddenly the clearing seemed smaller. Appreciate the offer, but I'm not selling. Think carefully, Mr. Stone. This territory can be dangerous for a man living alone. Accidents happen. Fires start. Sometimes good foundations crack under unexpected pressure. Garrett's pleasant mask slipped just enough to reveal the predator beneath. I'd hate for something unfortunate to befall such impressive work. The threat hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her medical bag, as if she could somehow treat the violence that seemed to be brewing. I'll keep that in mind, Jacob said. His voice remained calm, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Garrett remounted his horse, his men following suit. I do hope you'll reconsider, Mr. Stone. For everyone's sake. His gaze lingered on Elena. Mrs. Martinez, perhaps you could help your friend understand the wisdom of accepting reasonable offers. A woman of your experience knows how quickly circumstances can change. After they rode away, the clearing felt violated somehow, as if Garrett's presence had poisoned the air. Jacob stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the half-built foundation. He'll be back, Elena said quietly. I know. Jacob picked up his hammer, testing its weight. Men like him don't take no for an answer the first time. Then why not sell? Find another place. Start over somewhere safer. Jacob turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. A deep, old pain that had nothing to do with Samuel Garrett's threats. Because I spent too many years running from men like him. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if the odds are long. He gestured to the foundation stones. This isn't just about land, Mrs. Martinez. It's about proving that decent folks can still make a stand in this world. Elena looked at the land deed weighted down against the mountain wind. Such a simple thing, a piece of paper that represented hope and danger in equal measure. He mentioned war parties, Apache raids. That was 20 years ago or more. The Apache have been peaceful for a decade, settled on the reservation down south. Garrett's just trying to spook us with old stories. Jacob knelt back down to his work. Besides, any warrior ghosts on this mountain have probably seen enough violence. Might be they'd welcome the sound of a family being built instead of another battle being fought. The sun climbed higher, and Elena found herself staying longer than she'd planned. She watched Jacob work, noting the careful way he fitted each stone, the patience he brought to every detail. This wasn't the rushed construction of a man trying to prove something. It was the deliberate craft of someone building for generations. When she finally mounted her mare to return to town, Jacob stood and touched the brim of his hat. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Martinez. Means more than you might think, having someone witness the beginning. As she rode back down the mountain trail, Elena carried with her the image of those foundation stones, solid, perfectly fitted, built to last. But she also carried the memory of Samuel Garrett's cold smile and the promise of trouble yet to come. The wooden horse in her pocket seemed heavier now, weighted with the knowledge that accepting Jacob's gift meant accepting the danger that came with it. Some promises, she was learning, required more courage to keep than others. But as she looked back one last time at the clearing, where Jacob continued his patient work, Elena realized something had shifted inside her. For the first time in 3 years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not just surviving it, but actually anticipating what it might bring. The foundation of more than just a house was being laid on Eagles Ridge, and despite the dangers that circled like vultures, Elena Martinez found herself wanting to be part of whatever was being built there. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm as steady as the sound of Jacob's hammer echoing down from Eagles Ridge. Each morning, Elena would tend to her patients in the clinic, her worn leather medical bag a constant companion as she moved through the town's daily struggles. Each evening, she would find herself looking north toward the mountain, wondering about the progress of walls and dreams being built stone by stone. Her medical bag had been Miguel's wedding gift to her, good leather that had aged to a rich brown, with compartments for bottles and instruments, herbs and bandages. She'd carried it through the fever epidemic that took her husband, through the border skirmishes when wounded soldiers filled every available space, through countless nights of birth and death and healing. It had become part of her identity as much as the wedding ring on her finger. "You're distracted," Rosa observed one afternoon, watching Elena reorganize her medical supplies for the third time. "That bag's been sorted more times than a gambler's deck this week." "I'm being thorough," Elena said, not looking up from the bottles of laudanum and carbolic acid she was arranging. "Organization saves lives." "Uh-huh." Rosa poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot she kept warm on the small stove. "And it has nothing to do with a certain cowboy who's been bringing you wildflowers every few days." Elena's hands stilled. It was true. Jacob had taken to leaving small bouquets by her clinic door. Mountain lupine, Indian paintbrush, wild roses that somehow survived in the harsh landscape. Never with a note, never with fanfare, just quiet gifts that brightened her austere workspace. "He's being kind," Elena said finally. "Nothing more." "Honey, I've been watching men for more years than I care to count. That's not kindness. That's courting. The slow, patient kind that means he's serious about his intentions." Before Elena could respond, commotion erupted from the street outside. Through her window, she could see a crowd gathering around Tucker, Samuel Garrett's lean gunman. He was nailing something to the post outside the general store. "What's he doing?" Rosa moved to peer over Elena's shoulder. Tucker stepped back, revealing a legal notice printed on official paper. Even from a distance, the words "Survey Dispute" and "Territorial Court" were clearly visible. "He's making it official," Elena breathed. "Garrett's challenging Jacob's deed." They hurried outside, joining the cluster of townspeople reading the notice. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the meaning was clear. Samuel Garrett was claiming prior rights to the land on Eagles Ridge, based on what he alleged were errors in the original territorial survey. "That's a load of bull," muttered Pete from the general store. "That land's been available for purchase for 5 years. If Garrett had a claim, why wait until now?" Tucker's dead eyes fixed on the old man. "Mr. Garrett don't appreciate having his legal rights questioned by folks who ain't qualified to understand such matters." "I understand claim jumping when I see it," Pete shot back, his weathered face flushed with anger. Tucker's hand moved to his gun butt, a casual gesture that sent most of the crowd stepping backward. Only Pete held his ground, trembling with righteous fury, but refusing to retreat. "That's enough." Elena stepped between them, her medical bag clutched in both hands. "Tucker, if you've got business in this town, conduct it peacefully. Pete, there's no sense in getting shot over legal papers." Tucker studied her with those flat, emotionless eyes. "You'd be the widow woman who's been keeping company with Stone. I'm the woman who tends this town's wounds. Don't make me add you to the list of people who need doctoring." Something flickered in Tucker's expression. Not fear, but a cold calculation. "Might want to be careful about the company you keep, lady. Some associations ain't healthy in these parts." After Tucker rode away, the crowd dispersed with the nervous energy of people who'd seen trouble coming but couldn't do anything to stop it. Elena remained by the notice, reading it more carefully. The legal language was designed to confuse, but the timeline was clear. Garrett was demanding a new survey, claiming the territorial records were fraudulent, and asking the court to void Jacob's deed pending resolution. How long does something like this take? Rosa asked, reading over her shoulder. Months, maybe longer, and that's if it ever gets heard. Elena folded the notice, her mind racing. Garrett doesn't need to win in court. He just needs to tie Jacob up in legal proceedings long enough to make him give up. What will you tell him? Elena looked up toward Eagle's Ridge, where she could just make out the distant smoke from Jacob's cooking fire. The truth. And then I suppose we'll see what kind of man he really is when the pressure's on. The ride up the mountain felt longer than usual, weighted by the legal notice in her saddlebag. She found Jacob working on the frame of what would become the house's main room. The walls were taking shape, solid timber construction with careful joints that spoke of skill passed down through generations. He'd made remarkable progress for a man working alone. Mrs. Martinez, he set down his saw and wiped sweat from his forehead. Didn't expect you today. We need to talk. She dismounted and pulled out the folded notice. Garrett made his move. Jacob read the document in silence, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to her. Well, he said quietly, figured it was coming. That's all? That's your response? Elena couldn't keep the frustration out of her voice. He's trying to steal your land through legal trickery, and you're just going to accept it? I'm going to fight it, but I'm not going to pretend this changes anything. Jacob gestured to the half-built house. This foundation is solid. These walls are straight and true. Whatever Garrett does with his lawyers and his paperwork doesn't change the fact that this place is meant to be a home. But if you lose, then I'll have spent a year building something beautiful instead of sitting on my hands worrying about what might happen. His gray eyes met hers. Mrs. Martinez, I've learned that you can't live your life based on other people's threats. Sometimes you just have to do what's right and trust that things will work out. Elena stared at him, this man who faced legal ruin with the same calm determination he brought to fitting timber joints. Most people would be furious or scared. Oh, I'm both of those things. But fury and fear don't build houses or win court cases. Jacob picked up a piece of lumber, running his hands along its surface to check for flaws. My father used to say that a man's character shows clearest when the storm clouds gather. Anyone can be brave when the sun's shining. What if Garrett doesn't limit himself to legal challenges? Tucker made it clear they're willing to use other methods. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I won't let the threat of violence stop me from building something good. He looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. Unless you think I should. If being associated with me puts you in danger. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's written all over your face. Jacob set down the lumber and faced her fully. I meant what I said about building you a home, Mrs. Martinez. But I won't hold you to anything that might bring you harm. If you want to step back, protect yourself. Stop. The word came out sharper than she intended. Elena took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that seemed as scattered as leaves in a dust devil. I'm not afraid of Samuel Garrett or his hired guns. I've lived through worse than him. Then what is it? Elena looked at the house taking shape around them, at the careful craftsmanship that spoke of love and hope and permanence. I'm afraid of believing this is real. I'm afraid of letting myself want something this much again. The honesty of her words surprised her. She'd meant to discuss legal strategies and safety precautions, not bare her soul to this quiet giant who built dreams from timber and stone. One is dangerous, Jacob agreed, moving closer. She could smell the clean scent of pine sap and honest sweat. Makes you vulnerable, but it also makes you alive. I've been dead inside for a long time, Mrs. Martinez, working with my hands, keeping to myself, telling myself that was enough. Then I saw you in that clinic, working yourself to the bone for people who couldn't pay you properly, and I remembered what it felt like to want something worth fighting for. His words hit her like a physical blow, so raw and honest that she had to look away. Miguel used to say things like that, about fighting for what mattered. What happened to him, if you don't mind my asking? Border fever, the kind that burns through a person in 3 days. leaving nothing but emptiness behind. Elena's hand moved to her medical bag as if the familiar weight could anchor her. I tried everything. Herbs, poultices, prayers. Nothing worked. The fever took him, and the complications it left behind took any chance I had of giving him children. I'm sorry. Are you? Even knowing I'm barren, that this family you want, I told you before, family isn't just blood. Jacob's voice was gentle but firm. A home isn't just about children, Mrs. Martinez. It's about two people choosing to build something together, whatever form that takes. The mountain wind stirred the pines around them, carrying the scent of wood smoke and wild roses. Elena found herself imagining what this place might look like when the house was finished. Windows glowing with warm light, a garden growing beside the creek. The sound of laughter carried on the evening breeze. It was a dangerous dream, made more dangerous by how desperately she wanted it to be real. That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains, Jacob told Elena about his father's hammer. They sat on the porch he'd just finished framing, sharing coffee and watching lightning flicker in the distance. My grandfather brought this hammer west after the war, Jacob said, holding the worn tool in his calloused hands. Carried it through 3 territories before settling in Colorado. Built his first cabin with it, and his second when the first one burned down. My father inherited it when he was 16, and I got it when I turned 21. The hammer was ancient by frontier standards, its head darkened with age and use. The handle worn smooth by 3 generations of stonemen. Scratches and dents told stories of countless projects, from barns to cradles to coffins. 4 generations of promises, Elena murmured, running her finger along the handle's smooth surface. That's a heavy inheritance. Heavy but honest. My grandfather used to say that a man's worth could be measured by what he built that lasted longer than he did. Jacob set the hammer carefully beside him. He built a ranch that supported 2 families for 40 years. My father built a reputation for honest dealing that opened doors across 3 territories. And what will you build? I'm hoping to build a life that proves promises can still be kept in this world. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Jacob glanced at the darkening sky. Storm's coming. You should head back to town before it hits. But the first fat raindrops were already spattering the dust, and within minutes the mountain was shrouded in a downpour that turned the trail treacherous. Elena found herself taking shelter in the half-built house, watching water drip through gaps in the roof that weren't yet finished. I can sleep in the lean-to, Jacob said, his voice carefully neutral. Keep things proper. We're both adults, Mr. Stone. I think we can share a roof without causing scandal. Elena settled her medical bag in a dry corner and looked around at the skeleton of walls that would someday be rooms. Besides, I'd like to see how solid this foundation really is when the weather tests it. As the storm raged outside, they discovered that some foundations, built with care, patience, and honest intention, could weather any tempest. And in the morning, when the sun broke through the clouds to reveal a world washed clean, Elena Martinez realized she was no longer just visiting Jacob Stone's dream. She was becoming part of it. 2 months after the storm, the kitchen table was finished. Jacob had carved it from a single piece of oak that he'd felled and seasoned himself, working on it during the quiet evening hours when the day's construction was done. The surface was smooth as glass, with flowing grain that caught the lamplight like captured water. Around the edges, he'd carved a border of wild roses and mountain laurel, flowers that grew naturally around their spring. It's beautiful, Elena whispered, running her hands over the intricate carvings. She'd arrived that morning to find the table in place, set with 2 simple plates and cups Jacob had traded for in town. A small bouquet of actual wild roses sat in a mason jar at the center, their fragrance mixing with the scent of fresh pine from the nearly completed walls. Figured we should have somewhere proper to share meals, Jacob said, his voice carrying a note of shy pride. Table's the heart of any home, place where families gather, where important conversations happen. The house had taken shape around them, like a prayer made manifest in wood and stone. The walls were up now, with windows that framed views of the valley below and the peaks beyond. The roof was tight against weather, and Jacob had even managed to install a proper floor, wide planks that felt solid beneath their feet. It was still rough in places, lacking the finishing touches that would make it truly complete, but it felt like a home. When will you move in? Elena asked, settling into one of the two chairs he'd crafted to match the table. Soon. Maybe next week, if the weather holds. Jacob poured coffee from a pot that had been warming by the fire. Been looking forward to sleeping under a roof I built myself. They'd fallen into this routine over the weeks, sharing breakfast at the table while discussing the day's plans. Elena helping with small tasks that didn't require a carpenter's skill. Both of them carefully dancing around the growing intimacy that threatened to overwhelm their careful boundaries. Garrett's been quiet lately, Elena observed, though she couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Too quiet. Tucker was in town yesterday asking questions about water rights and mineral claims. Rosa said he spent 2 hours at the territorial office going through old records. Jacob's expression darkened. He's building a case, gathering ammunition for whatever legal challenge comes next. Elena had heard whispers in town, stories of mysterious accidents befalling people who crossed Samuel Garrett, of fires and floods and misfortunes that seemed to strike his enemies with suspicious regularity. Maybe you should hire a lawyer, someone who understands territorial law better than we do. With what money? Everything I had went into buying this land and building this house. Jacob gestured around them at the solid walls, the careful craftsmanship evident in every detail. I'm a carpenter and a horsebreaker, Mrs. Martinez. I don't have the kind of resources it takes to fight a man like Garrett in court. The reality of their situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Garrett had money, influence, and the kind of ruthless determination that wore down opposition through sheer persistence. They had only their conviction that right should triumph over might, a conviction that seemed increasingly naive as the days passed. Then we'll fight him another way, Elena said quietly. How? By refusing to be intimidated, by building the life we want despite his threats, by proving that decent people can still make a stand in this world. She used his own words back to him, seeing them land with quiet impact. A slow smile spread across Jacob's weathered features. You're starting to sound like someone who believes in this place. I'm starting to believe in a lot of things I thought I'd given up on. The admission surprised her with its honesty. She'd been fighting her growing attachment to both the house and its builder, but sitting at this table in the morning light, she found her defenses crumbling. Such is the possibility that some promises really can be kept, that a man might actually build what he says he'll build. Elena's fingers traced the carved roses along the table's edge. Such is the idea that I might be brave enough to accept what you're offering. Jacob's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Are you saying... I'm saying I'd like to try, if you're still willing to take the risk of building a family with a barren widow who comes with more problems than solutions. Elena. Her name seemed to catch in his throat, as if speaking it aloud made everything more real. I've been hoping to hear those words for months. Then maybe it's time we stop pretending this is just about building a house. Before Jacob could respond, the sound of approaching riders broke the morning stillness. Through the window, they could see dust rising from the trail. Too much dust for a single horse, too early in the day for casual visitors. Stay inside, Jacob said, moving to where his rifle leaned against the wall, but Elena was already reaching for her medical bag. In her experience, groups of riders arriving at speed usually meant someone was hurt. She followed Jacob onto the porch, squinting against the morning sun to make out the approaching figures. It was Pete from the general store, riding hard with 2 other men Elena recognized from town. Even at a distance, she could see blood on Pete's shirt and the way he swayed in his saddle. What happened? Jacob called out as they pulled up in the yard. Garrett's men, Pete gasped, sliding down from his horse with obvious pain. Came to the store this morning, said I owed back taxes on my property. When I showed them my receipts, they said the territorial office had made errors, that I needed to pay again or face seizure. Elena was already examining the gash across Pete's forehead. This needs stitching. What did you do to get hurt? Told them to go to hell, Pete said with grim satisfaction. Tucker didn't much like that answer. Used his gun butt to improve my manners. Same thing happened to the Morrison widow, one of the other riders said, and the Chen family that runs the laundry. All of a sudden, everybody's property taxes are in question. Jacob's face had gone hard as granite. He's expanding his operation, using the legal system as a weapon against anyone who might side with us. It's working, Pete admitted, wincing as Elena cleaned his wound. Half the folks in town are talking about selling out rather than fight. They can't afford lawyers and they're scared of what happens if they resist. As Elena worked on Pete's injury, she listened to the men discuss Garrett's escalating campaign. He was being methodical, targeting the most vulnerable members of the community first: widows, elderly settlers, families with questionable titles to their land. Each victory made him stronger and his remaining opponents weaker. "We need to organize," Jacob said. "Pool our resources, hire legal representation, fight back as a group rather than as individuals." "With what money?" Pete's voice was bitter. "Most of us are barely scraping by as it is. Garrett knows that, which is why he's pushing now." "Then we fight without lawyers. Territorial law is clear about property rights and due process. If we document everything, keep careful records." "You're talking about taking on a man who has the territorial governor in his pocket," one of the writers interrupted. "Garrett doesn't just have money. He has connections, influence, the kind of power that makes law meaningless." The conversation continued around the kitchen table as Elena finished treating Pete's wound, but she could hear the defeat creeping into their voices. Good people, worn down by circumstances beyond their control, facing an enemy with resources they couldn't match. After the men left, she and Jacob sat in heavy silence. The morning's promise had been shattered by the reality of their situation. Garrett wasn't just threatening their individual dreams. He was dismantling the entire community piece by piece. "Maybe I should sell," Jacob said finally. "Take his offer, use the money to start over somewhere else. At least that way, the rest of you wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. Is that what you want?" Elena's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. "What I want doesn't matter if keeping it destroys innocent people. It matters to me." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "This morning I told you I was ready to try building something together. That offer wasn't conditional on everything being easy." Jacob's fingers closed around hers and she could feel the calluses earned by months of honest labor. "It's not just about us anymore. Garrett's using our situation to hurt other people. Then we make sure those people aren't facing him alone." Elena's mind was already working through possibilities. "Rosa has connections throughout the territory. Pete's been here longer than anyone. He knows who to trust, who might help. The Morrison widow has 3 grown sons who've been looking for a fight since their father died. You're talking about open resistance. I'm talking about what you said before, proving that decent people can still make a stand." Elena squeezed his hand. "This table, this house, what we're building here, it's not just about us. It's about showing that ordinary folks can still choose to build instead of tear down, to create instead of destroy." Outside, storm clouds were gathering again over the mountains. But inside their kitchen, at the table Jacob had carved with his own hands, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the fierce joy of having something worth fighting for. "If we do this," Jacob said slowly, "there's no going back. Garrett won't stop with legal challenges. It'll get ugly. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for ugly." Elena released his hand and reached for her medical bag. "First thing we need to do is make sure everyone in town knows they're not alone, that there are people willing to stand with them." "And the second thing?" Elena looked around at the house that had become so much more than shelter. It had become a symbol of hope in a place where hope was in short supply. "We finish what we started. We build the life we promised each other, and we do it loud enough that everyone can see what's possible when good people refuse to give up." The carved roses on the table seemed to catch the fading light, their delicate beauty a testament to the power of patient creation in a world too often ruled by destruction. Whatever came next, they would face it together, at this table, in this house, built on foundations strong enough to weather any storm. But even as Elena spoke brave words about standing together, a chill ran down her spine. She'd seen the cold calculation in Tucker's eyes, the casual way Garrett's men dispensed violence. They were no longer just fighting for their dreams, they were fighting for their lives. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that some battles couldn't be won with determination alone. Some enemies required more than courage to defeat. The storm was coming, and it would test more than just the strength of timber and stone. It would test the very foundations of everything they'd built together, including the fragile trust between two people who dared to believe in promises again. The pressed wildflower lay carefully preserved between the pages of Elena's medical journal, its petals still holding a ghost of their original purple color. She'd found it growing beside their spring 3 weeks after moving into the house. The first wild larkspur to bloom in the small garden she'd started behind the kitchen. Now, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, that single flower had multiplied into patches of color that softened the harsh landscape around their home. "It's amazing what grows when you give it a chance," she murmured, pressing the journal closed and setting it on the kitchen table. She could hear Jacob splitting wood for the winter ahead, the rhythmic thwack of his axe a comforting soundtrack to the domestic life they'd built together. The house felt complete now, in ways that had nothing to do with construction. Her medical supplies occupied a corner of the main room, organized on shelves Jacob had built to her specifications. His woodworking tools hung neatly on the workshop wall, each one cleaned and maintained with the care of a craftsman who understood that good tools lasted generations. Their belongings had merged naturally, finding harmony in the spaces designed for two people learning to live as one. "Mrs. Stone," she said aloud, testing the sound of it. They'd been married by Reverend Matthews in a simple ceremony attended by half the town, with Rosa serving as matron of honor and Pete giving her away in place of the father she'd lost years ago. The wedding had been more than a personal celebration. It had been a statement of faith in the future, a declaration that some dreams were worth the risk of believing in. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her reverie. These days, any unexpected visitor made her pulse quicken, but she recognized the easy gait of familiar mounts. Rosa rode into the yard with young Billy Morse, both of them grinning with the kind of excitement that suggested good news. "Elena," Rosa called out as she dismounted, "you'll want to hear this." Jacob emerged from the woodshed, axe still in hand, as they gathered on the porch. Billy could barely contain himself, practically bouncing with the need to share his news. "Tell them what you told me," Rosa urged. "I was fishing down by Miller's Creek yesterday," Billy began, his words tumbling over each other in excitement. "You know that old cabin where the hermit used to live? Well, I saw Tucker and two other men going through it with shovels and picks, like they was looking for something buried." "Probably just checking for mineral rights," Jacob said, though his expression was thoughtful. "That's what I thought too, until I heard them talking. Tucker was madder than a wet cat, saying how Garrett had been sure there was silver in that hillside, but all they'd found was worthless rock." Elena felt something click into place in her mind. Silver claims. That's what this is really about. "What do you mean?" Rosa asked. "Think about it. Why would Garrett suddenly be interested in every piece of property around Silverfall? It's not about the land itself. It's about what might be under it." Elena's voice grew stronger as the pieces fell together. "He's been buying up claims based on some geological survey or mining report that suggests silver deposits in this area." Jacob set down his axe, his expression darkening. "Which means he doesn't just want our land for its own sake. He needs it to complete some larger plan." "But if there's no silver," Billy said, confusion evident in his young voice, "why keep pushing?" "Because he's already invested too much to back down now," Rosa answered grimly. "Men like Garrett don't admit they've made mistakes. They double down, hoping to recoup their losses." That evening, as they sat by the fire discussing the implications of Billy's discovery, Elena found herself studying her husband's profile. The months of uncertainty had etched new lines around his eyes, but they'd also revealed a core of strength she was still learning to trust. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, noticing her scrutiny. "I'm thinking about that flower," she said, touching the journal where the pressed larkspur lay hidden. "How it grew in ground that seemed too harsh to support anything beautiful. And I'm thinking that maybe we've been approaching this all wrong." Jacob turned to face her fully. "What do you mean?" "Instead of just trying to protect what we have, maybe we should be planting seeds for what comes next." Elena's voice gathered confidence as the idea took shape. "Garrett's counting on us being isolated, fighting separate battles he can defeat one by one. But what if we weren't separate? What if we were connected? You're talking about organizing the whole territory. I'm talking about proving that decent people can build something worth protecting, not just individual homes, but a real community where families can grow, and children can learn, and neighbors look out for each other." Rosa leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. What would that look like? A school for starters? Rosa, you've got enough gold to hire a real teacher, and there are plenty of children in this territory who've never seen the inside of a classroom. Elena's voice grew stronger as the vision crystallized. A church where people can gather for more than just funerals. Maybe even a proper doctor's office where folks don't have to risk their lives traveling 3 days for medical care. That's a lot of building, Jacob observed. You said yourself that a man's worth is measured by what he builds that lasts longer than he does. Well, what lasts longer than community? What's stronger than people who've chosen to stand together? Billy had been listening with the intensity of youth, discovering that adults sometimes had ideas worth hearing. My pa always said this territory could be something special if folks just worked together instead of fighting each other. Your pa was right, Jacob said quietly. Question is, are we brave enough to try? That night, as they lay in their bed listening to the mountain wind in the pines, Elena felt the pressed flower's presence in her journal like a talisman of hope. Such a small thing, a single bloom in hostile ground, but it had proven that life could flourish where it seemed impossible. Jacob, when you said you'd build me a home, did you know it would turn into this? His arm tightened around her. I knew it would be an adventure. Didn't know it would be a revolution. Are you sorry? Sorry for finding the love of my life. Sorry for discovering that a quiet widow has the heart of a warrior. His chuckle rumbled through his chest. The only thing I'm sorry about is that it took me so long to find you. Outside their window, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the garden where wildflowers had proven that beauty could grow in the most unlikely places. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight in their war against those who would tear down rather than build up. But tonight, in the house built with his hands and filled with her dreams, they had each other in the beginning of something larger than themselves. Something worth fighting for, something that might just be strong enough to last. The faded photograph fell from Jacob's coat pocket as Elena was hanging it by the fire to dry after his return from town. The image was cracked and yellowed with age, but she could clearly make out two young men standing beside a mining camp, their arms around each other's shoulders like brothers. One was unmistakably Jacob, perhaps 15 years younger, his face unmarked by the weathering of hard years. The other was Samuel Garrett. What is this? Elena asked when Jacob returned from tending the horses. The blood drained from his face when he saw what she held. For a long moment, he stood frozen in the doorway, his gray eyes reflecting a pain so deep it made her chest ache. Where did you find that? It fell from your coat. Elena's voice was steady, but her mind was racing. Jacob, who is this man with you? He closed the door carefully, hung up his hat with deliberate precision, and sat heavily at their kitchen table. The photograph lay between them like an accusation. That's Samuel Garrett, he said finally, taken about 16 years ago at a silver mine in Colorado. You knew him before all this. I knew him. Jacob's voice was barely above a whisper. We were partners, business partners, and I thought friends. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Everything about their situation suddenly looked different, viewed through the lens of this hidden connection. Partners in what? The mine, the Celestial Star claim up near Leadville. We'd found a rich vein of silver ore, worked it for 2 years, made more money than either of us had ever dreamed of. Jacob's hands clenched into fists on the table. I was married then, to my Sarah. We had a little house near the mine, and she was expecting our first child. What happened? Garrett got greedy, started cutting corners on safety, pushing the miners harder, ignoring structural problems in the deeper shafts. I tried to talk to him, told him we were making enough money to do things right, but he wanted more. Jacob's voice grew harder. Said I was soft, that Sarah had made me weak. Elna could see where this was leading, and her heart began to race. The mine collapsed, part of it. The section where the Chinese workers were digging, Garrett said they were expendable, that their lives were worth less than white men's. I tried to stop him from sending them down that shaft, but he overruled me. Jacob's hands trembled slightly. 12 men died that day, crushed under tons of rock because my partner decided their safety wasn't worth the cost of proper timber supports. And Sarah was visiting the mine that day, bringing lunch to the workers the way she always did. She believed in treating people decently, no matter what color their skin was. Tears gathered in Jacob's eyes. The collapse triggered a cave-in in the main shaft. Sarah and 3 other women were trapped. The horror of it settled over Elena like a shroud. You couldn't save them. By the time we dug them out, it was too late. Sarah was alive when we found her, but barely. She lived long enough to... His voice cracked. She died in my arms, along with our unborn child. I'm so sorry. Garrett didn't even attend the funeral, sold his share of the mine, and disappeared with the money while I was still burying my wife. Jacob picked up the photograph, staring at the image of his younger, more trusting self. Left me with debts I couldn't pay, and a reputation destroyed by association with his crimes. Elena felt pieces clicking into place, pieces that changed everything she thought she understood about their situation. That's why you came here. You followed him. I spent 10 years tracking him, learning about his business dealings, his methods, his weaknesses. He's been doing this for years, using legal manipulation and intimidation to steal property from people who can't fight back. Jacob's voice grew cold. The man who destroyed my life has built his fortune on destroying others. And you chose this land specifically to draw him out. The mineral survey report suggested silver deposits throughout this area. I knew if I settled here, started building something permanent, it would get his attention eventually. Jacob looked at her with haunted eyes. I've been planning this confrontation for a decade, Elena. Everything I've done since coming to Silverfall has been leading up to it. The words hit her like separate physical blows. Everything. Their meeting, his proposal, the house, their marriage, all of it had been part of some elaborate plan for revenge. Including me? No! The word came out sharp, desperate. You were never part of the plan. I came here intending to face Garrett alone, to make him pay for what he did to Sarah and those miners. But then I met you and you decided I'd make good bait. Elena's voice was bitter as the taste in her mouth. A way to make him believe you were really settling down, really vulnerable. That's not true, isn't it? Think about it from his perspective. A lone man building a house might be a threat, but a man building a home for his wife? That's someone with something to lose. Someone who can be threatened and intimidated and eventually broken. Jacob reached across the table toward her, but she pulled away. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that she couldn't bear his touch. I love you, he said desperately. Whatever else you believe, believe that. I love you more than I ever loved Sarah, more than I thought possible after losing her. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The grieving widow who fits so perfectly into your plan for revenge? Elena, please. How long were you going to wait before telling me the truth? Until after Garrett was dead? Until after you'd used our marriage to destroy him, the way he destroyed your first family? She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. Or were you planning never to tell me at all? I was going to tell you everything after it was over. After Garrett couldn't hurt anyone else. After you'd gotten what you wanted, you mean? Elena moved toward her medical bag, her movements sharp and mechanical. Well, congratulations, Jacob. Your plan worked perfectly. You've made yourself vulnerable enough to draw him in, and you've given him the perfect target to use against you. Where are you going? Back to town, back to my clinic, back to my real life instead of this fantasy you built around your need for revenge. She shouldered her bag, avoiding his eyes. You wanted to use me as bait? Fine, but I won't stay here and wait for the trap to spring. Elena, if you leave now, what? You'll lose your advantage? Your cover will be blown? She turned back to face him, and the pain in her eyes was terrible to see. I spent 3 years learning to live without believing in promises, Jacob. You made me believe again. Made me think that maybe finally someone was offering me something real. But this was never real, was it? It was just another lie in service of your greater truth. Our marriage is real. What we've built together is real. What we've built is a house on a foundation of lies, and houses like that don't last, no matter how carefully they're constructed. She left him sitting at the kitchen table with the photograph and the wreckage of everything they'd built together. The pressed wildflower in her medical journal seemed to mock her now. Such foolish hope, Such naive belief that beautiful things could grow in harsh ground. Some flowers, she realized as she rode down the mountain trail in the gathering dusk, were never meant to bloom. Some promises were too heavy for the soil they were planted in. And some men carried so much pain that they could only build with broken pieces, even when they thought they were creating something whole. Behind her, the house stood dark against the mountain sky, no longer a home, but a monument to the difference between love and need, between choice and manipulation. Tomorrow would bring consequences for this revelation. Garrett would sense weakness and press his advantage. The community would suffer for Jacob's deception, and she would have to learn once again how to live without the dream of belonging somewhere. But tonight, she just rode toward town and tried not to think about the man she'd left behind, sitting alone in a house built for two people who might never find their way back to each other. The Iron Bell arrived on a freight wagon 3 days after Elena left, its bronze surface gleaming despite the dust of travel. Jacob had ordered it months ago from a foundry in Denver, intending it as a surprise for their first Christmas together. Now it served a different purpose entirely. He mounted it on a tall post beside the house, rigging a rope system that would allow the bell to be heard for miles in every direction. 1 ring for medical emergency, 2 for fire, 3 for danger requiring immediate assistance. "You planning to signal the whole territory?" Rosa asked, watching him test the mechanism. She'd ridden up that morning with supplies and news from town, her face grave with concern. "Something like that." Jacob adjusted the rope tension, listening to the bell's clear tone echo off the mountain peaks. "How is she?" "Hurt, angry, working herself to death, tending every scraped knee and sniffling nose in Silverfall." Rosa's voice carried a note of reproach. "You really made a mess of things, didn't you?" "I know." "Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you traded the best thing that ever happened to you for the chance to settle an old score." Jacob set down his tools and faced her directly. "Garrett killed my wife and 12 innocent men. He's built his fortune on the misery of others, and he won't stop until someone stops him. I think you should have trusted Elena enough to tell her the truth from the beginning." Rosa's eyes flashed with anger. "That woman has survived things that would break most men. She could have handled your past, but she can't handle being lied to." The words stung because they were true. Jacob had spent so many years planning his confrontation with Garrett that he'd forgotten how to be honest about anything else. "It's too late now," he said quietly. "Is it? Have you actually tried talking to her?" "She won't see me, won't even read the letters I've sent." Jacob looked down toward Silverfall. "Maybe that's for the best. Garrett's planning something big. The longer she stays away from me, the safer she'll be." "You think he'll come here?" "I know he will. Tucker's been watching the house for days. Garrett's done playing games. He wants this land, and he's ready to take it by force." Before Jacob could respond, the sound of approaching riders interrupted them. Pete rode into the yard with the Morrison boys and half a dozen other men from town, all armed and looking grim. "Heard you might be expecting trouble," Pete said without preamble. "Figured you could use some company." "This isn't your fight," Jacob began, but Pete cut him off. "Like hell it isn't. Garrett's men burned out the Chen family last night. We're tired of being picked off one by one. Time to make a stand." One by one, the other men voiced their agreement. These weren't professional fighters. They were farmers and shopkeepers who decided that some things were worth the risk of standing up for. "What's the plan?" asked Tom Morrison. Jacob looked around at the faces of his neighbors. "Garrett will come at night, probably with a dozen men or more. He'll try to burn us out, make it look like an accident. Then we'll be ready for him." Pete checked his rifle. "This house built to withstand a siege?" "Built to last," Jacob confirmed. "Stone foundation, thick walls, multiple firing positions, and the bell can summon help from 20 miles away if we need it." "What about Elena?" Rosa asked quietly. The thought had been haunting Jacob for days. Garrett was ruthless enough to target innocent people to get what he wanted. "She'll be safe at the clinic," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Before anyone could answer, young Billy Morse came racing up the trail on his horse, his face flushed with exertion and fear. "They got her," he gasped, sliding down from his saddle. "Garrett's men took Mrs. Elena right out of her clinic. Tucker said to tell you, if you want her back alive, you'll meet them at the old mining camp by Miller's Creek. Sunset. Come alone, or she dies." The words hit Jacob like physical blows. Everything he'd feared had happened anyway. Garrett had found the one thing that could force him to abandon all strategy. "It's a trap," Pete said unnecessarily. "Of course it's a trap." Jacob was already moving toward his rifle. "But I can't leave her with him." "You go to that mining camp alone, you're both dead," Tom Morrison pointed out. "Then what do you suggest?" Rosa stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Who says you have to go alone?" Garrett's expecting Jacob to show up desperate and alone. "What if we give him something different?" "What do you mean?" "I mean we make him think he's won, then show him how wrong he is." Rosa's smile was sharp as a blade. "That bell of yours carries a long way, doesn't it?" Jacob felt hope stir in his chest. Far enough to reach the territorial marshal's office in Silverton. Elena was right about building community. Maybe it's time to see if what we've built is strong enough to fight back. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finalized their plans. It was desperate, risky, and dependent on precise timing. But it was also the first time in 10 years that Jacob felt like he was fighting for something larger than his own pain. The old mining camp at Miller's Creek looked like a monument to broken dreams in the dying light. Abandoned shacks leaned against each other for support, their windows dark and empty. Jacob approached on foot, his hands visible and empty, playing the role of a desperate man. "You're late." Samuel Garrett emerged from the largest shack, his appearance as immaculate as always. His smile held the cold satisfaction of a man who believed he'd finally won. "Where is she?" Jacob kept his voice steady. "Safe for now, though I must say, she has quite the tongue on her." Garrett's amusement was genuine. "She's remarkable, really. I can see why you chose her for your little charade." "This isn't about her." "Isn't it? Come now, Jacob. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the pattern?" Garrett stepped closer. "You always were predictable, even back in Colorado." Tucker appeared in the doorway behind Garrett, his dead eyes scanning the surrounding rocks. 2 more gunmen flanked the building, their weapons ready. "I came alone, like you asked," Jacob said. "Now let her go." "In due time. First, we need to settle our accounts." Garrett pulled out a folded document. "Deed transfer. Sign it, and your wife goes free." "And if I sign, what guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word?" Garrett's laugh was genuinely amused. "The same guarantee I gave those Chinese miners in Colorado. The same promise I made to your first wife." His expression hardened. "None at all." The casual admission ignited a rage that threatened to overwhelm all strategic thinking. "You killed her deliberately. I killed her economically. Structural supports cost money. Your wife's bleeding heart was bad for business." Garrett began walking in a slow circle around Jacob. "Sentiment like that is poison in a mining operation." "Where is she?" Jacob asked again. "Sign the deed first." "Let me see her first." Garrett nodded to Tucker. The gunman disappeared into the shack and emerged moments later, half dragging Elena between him and another man. Even in the fading light, Jacob could see the bruises on her face and the defiant set of her shoulders. "Let her go," Jacob called out. "I'm fine," Elena replied, her voice carrying clearly across the camp. "Don't give him anything. Whatever he's promised, he's lying. You have 30 seconds to sign, or Tucker will demonstrate what happens to women who don't know their place." "All right," Jacob said, reaching for the document. "But I want to tell her something first." Jacob raised his voice, projecting it toward the shack. "The bell is ready. 3 rings, just like we planned." Elena's eyes widened with understanding. "Thank you," she called back. Garrett was growing impatient. "Enough sentiment. Sign the paper." Jacob took the pen, bending over the makeshift table. "There's just one problem with your plan," he said, straightening without signing. "Which is, you assumed I came here to save her, but she never needed saving. We came here to finish this." The first ring of the iron bell echoed across the mountains, its clear tone cutting through the evening air. Before the echoes faded, it rang again, and again. 3 rings. Garrett's expression shifted from satisfaction to alarm as the sound of approaching horses began to filter through the darkness. Not just a few riders, but many, a thunder of hoofbeats that spoke of half the territory converging on Miller's Creek. "You brought an army," Garrett breathed. "I brought a community," Jacob replied. People who are tired of being afraid. The gunfight erupted with sudden violence. Hidden riflemen opened fire from carefully chosen positions, their shots coordinated and deadly. In the chaos, Elena broke free from her guards, reaching cover behind a fallen timber. When the shooting finally stopped, Garrett emerged with his hands raised, his immaculate clothes torn and dirty. The arrogant confidence was gone. As the territorial marshal and his deputies rode into the camp, Jacob finally reached Elena. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Bruised, scared, but alive." She looked up at him. "I should have told you everything from the beginning." "Yes, you should have. But I understand why you didn't." Her hand found his. "I was so angry about the deception that I couldn't see past it to the pain underneath." Before Jacob could respond, she reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. "I brought this for you," she said, revealing a simple wooden ring. "I carved it myself from a piece of our kitchen table." "Marriage isn't about perfect honesty from the beginning," she continued. "It's about choosing to be honest going forward." Jacob took the ring with trembling hands. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I want to try again. Really try this time, with all the truth between us." As Jacob slipped the wooden ring onto his finger, he felt the weight of 16 years of pain finally begin to lift. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still theirs to build together. Tonight, surrounded by friends under a sky full of stars, they had each other and the promise of something better than either had dared to hope for alone. Spring came early to Eagles Ridge that year, as if the mountain itself was celebrating the end of winter and the promise of new growth. Elena stood in the doorway of their rebuilt kitchen, watching Jacob carve toys for the 3 children who now called their house home. Jenny, orphaned when fever took her parents. Michael, whose family had died in a wagon accident, and little Tom, found wandering the territory after Apache raiders destroyed his settlement. The small wooden horse he was finishing would join the dozens of others that filled a special chest in the children's room. Each toy was unique, carved with the patient love of a man who'd finally found the family he'd been meant to create. Not the family of blood he'd once imagined, but something richer and more complex, a chosen family built on love rather than obligation. "Papa Jacob," Jenny called from the kitchen table where she was practicing her letters. At 7, she was the eldest of their children, and she'd appointed herself teacher and protector of the younger ones. "Can you help me with this word?" Jacob set down his carving and moved to look over her shoulder. "That's community, little one. It means people who choose to take care of each other." "Like us?" "Exactly like us." The house had been rebuilt after a kitchen fire the previous fall. Not Garrett's doing, but a simple accident that could have been devastating if not for the community they'd helped create. Within hours of the bell's urgent summons, neighbors had arrived with water, tools, and helping hands. The damage was repaired within a week, and the new kitchen was even better than the original. That fire had taught them something important about the difference between a house and a home. The building could burn, but what they'd created together, the love, the trust, the network of relationships that connected them to every family in the territory, that was fireproof. "Mrs. Stone," Michael said, using the formal address he preferred, despite their invitations to call them Mama and Papa. At 5, he was still working through the trauma of losing his birth family, but he'd made remarkable progress. "When will the new baby get here?" Elena's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. The pregnancy had been a shock. The doctor in Silverton said that sometimes women who thought they were barren could conceive after years of trying, especially if their bodies had time to heal from old injuries. She and Jacob had cried together when they learned the news, overwhelmed by this unexpected gift. "Not for months yet," she told Michael, "but when the baby comes, we'll need your help taking care of him or her." "Or them," little Tom added solemnly. "Could be twins. Mrs. Henderson had twins." Jacob caught Elena's eye over the children's heads, his expression mixing joy with wonder. At 42, he'd never expected to experience the anticipation of his own child's birth. At 36, she'd given up hope of ever carrying a baby to term. Now they found themselves planning for a future that included both their chosen children and the biological child growing beneath her heart. "Speaking of babies," Elena said, "I need to check on the Morrison family. Mary's due any day now, and first babies can be unpredictable. The medical practice had grown along with the community. Elena now had a proper clinic in town, complete with modern equipment, purchased with fees from grateful patients who could finally afford to pay for quality care. But she still made house calls, still carried her old leather bag, still treated anyone who needed help regardless of their ability to pay. Take the children with you, Jacob suggested. They could use the exercise, and Jenny's been wanting to practice her midwifery skills. It had become their routine, involving the children in the work of community, teaching them that helping others wasn't just charity, but the foundation of civilization itself. Jenny had proven particularly gifted at medical work, her small hands gentle with patience and her mind quick to understand treatments. Michael showed aptitude for carpentry, spending hours with Jacob learning to join wood and build things that would last. Even little Tom, despite his age, had developed an uncanny ability to calm frightened animals and injured people. As they prepared to leave for town, Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror Jacob had hung by the front door. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd first accepted a wooden horse from a quiet giant. Her face was fuller, softened by happiness and the early glow of pregnancy. Her hands were still strong and capable, but they carried hope now instead of just competence. The gold wedding ring still circled her finger, but it had been joined by the wooden band she'd carved to match Jacob's. The two rings together told the story of her journey from loss to love, from solitude to family, from surviving to thriving. "Ready, Mama Elena?" Jenny asked, shouldering the small medical bag Jacob had made for her. "Ready." The ride to town took them past the cemetery where Miguel Martinez lay, buried beneath a simple stone marker. Elena still stopped there sometimes, not from grief, but from gratitude. Her first husband had taught her about love's possibilities. Her second had shown her love's endurance. Both gifts were part of who she'd become. "Will you tell us the story?" Michael asked as they rode. "About how Papa Jacob promised to build you a home?" It had become the children's favorite tale, the story of two lonely people who'd found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from broken pieces. Elena never tired of telling it, never tired of seeing their faces light up when she reached the part about the wooden horse and the promise that changed everything. "It started on a night when the rain was falling," she began, her voice carrying the cadence of a storyteller who'd found her perfect audience. "In a little clinic behind a saloon where a tired nurse was mending bandages and had stopped believing in promises. As they rode toward town, the iron bell caught the morning sunlight, its bronze surface gleaming like a beacon of hope. 3 rings for danger, but also 1 ring for celebration, 2 for gathering, 4 for welcome. It had become the voice of their community, calling people together for work and worship, for crisis and joy. Behind them, the house on Eagles Ridge stood solid against the mountain sky, its windows bright with reflected sun, smoke rising from the chimney where breakfast had been cooked and love had been shared. It was exactly what Jacob had promised to build. Not just a shelter, but a home. Not just a place to live, but a foundation for generations. And around that foundation, they'd built something even more precious than either had dared to imagine. A family created by choice, strengthened by trial, and blessed with the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The wooden toy horse in Jacob's workshop would be finished that evening, ready to join its brothers and sisters in the chest that held the dreams of children who'd learned that families could be built as surely as houses, one careful piece at a time. And when their own baby arrived, he or she would find a household full of love, a community ready to help, and parents who understood that the greatest promises were the ones that took a lifetime to keep. 2 months later, as autumn painted the mountains in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Elena sat in the rocking chair Jacob had crafted for the nursery, nursing their newborn daughter, while the other children played quietly nearby. Little Sarah, named for the woman whose memory had brought Jacob to this mountain, had arrived during a thunderstorm, as if announcing her intention to be a force of nature from the very beginning. "She's got your stubborn streak," Jacob observed, settling into the chair beside them with Tom curled up in his lap. "Took her sweet time deciding to join us." "And your hands," Elena replied, studying the baby's long fingers. "She'll be a builder like her papa." Through the window, they could see the lights of Silverfall twinkling in the valley below. The town had grown considerably since Garrett's defeat. New families had arrived, drawn by stories of a community where neighbors looked out for each other and promises were kept. A proper school had been built, with Jenny's teacher, a young woman from back east who'd answered Rosa's advertisement, already planning lessons for the spring term. The church was nearly finished too, its steeple rising like a prayer made manifest in wood and stone. On Sundays, families would gather there, not just for worship, but for the kind of fellowship that bound communities together across generations. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't made that promise? Elena asked quietly, careful not to wake the baby. Jacob considered this, his weathered hands gentle as he smoothed Tom's hair. I think about the man I was before I met you. Angry, bitter, living for nothing but revenge. That man would have destroyed Garrett and himself in the process, leaving nothing but ashes behind. And now? Now I understand what my grandfather meant about building things that last longer than you do. He gestured around them at the sleeping children, the warm room, the life they'd created together. This will outlast both of us. These children will grow up and build families of their own, and they'll remember what it feels like to be loved unconditionally. That's worth more than all the silver in Colorado. Elena smiled, remembering the frightened, grieving woman who'd once sat alone in a clinic behind a saloon, convinced that her best years were behind her. I used to think promises were just pretty words that broke the moment they met reality. Some are, Jacob agreed, but the ones built on truth, sealed with honest work, and kept through stubborn determination, those are the promises that change the world. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real storm of winter. But inside their home, surrounded by the laughter of children and warmed by the fire Jacob had built with his own hands, Elena felt nothing but contentment. The wooden horse that had started it all sat on the mantelpiece now, a reminder of the moment when two broken people had decided to trust in something bigger than their pain. Some folks spend their whole lives waiting for someone to keep just one promise. Elena and Jacob Stone had learned that the secret wasn't in the waiting, but in the choosing. To build, to love, to stand together against whatever storms might come. And in that choosing, they'd found something worth more than silver or gold. A home built on foundations strong enough to last forever. The baby stirred in her arms, opening eyes that were already showing hints of her father's steady gray. Elena touched the wooden ring on her finger, the symbol of promises remade and trust rebuilt, and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to prove that love could overcome any obstacle. But tonight, in this house filled with chosen family and unexpected blessings, they had everything they'd ever truly needed. Each other, and the unshakable knowledge that some promises really were worth keeping, no matter how long it took to fulfill them. 20 years later, Jenny Stone stood in the same doorway where her adoptive mother had once watched Jacob carve toys for orphan children. Now a skilled doctor in her own right, she watched her own children play in the garden, where wildflowers had once proven that beautiful things could grow in the harshest ground. The house on Eagles Ridge had weathered 2 decades of mountain storms, becoming a landmark that travelers used to navigate the territory. Its solid stone foundation and careful timber construction had outlasted 3 territorial governors, 2 economic panics, and countless smaller crises that might have broken a structure built on anything less than love and stubborn determination. Elena's medical journal sat open on the kitchen table, its pages filled with 20 years of births, deaths, and healings. The pressed wildflower from that first spring was still there, faded but intact. A reminder that some things endure not because they're strong, but because they're treasured. Beside it lay the wooden horse that had started it all, its surface polished smooth by the hands of 4 children who'd grown up knowing they were wanted, chosen, and loved without condition. The iron bell still stood on its post, though it rang now more often for celebrations than emergencies. Weddings, births, harvest festivals, and the simple joy of neighbors gathering to help each other through whatever life brought their way. The community that Elena and Jacob had helped build had become something neither could have imagined in those early days when they were just 2 broken people trying to trust in promises again. Michael had become the territory's finest carpenter. his buildings known throughout 3 states for their craftsmanship and integrity. Tom had grown into a gentle giant like his adoptive father, spending his days working with horses and his evenings carving toys for a new generation of children. And little Sarah, no longer little at 16, showed every sign of inheriting her parents' gift for bringing people together, organizing community events with the same patient skill Jacob brought to building houses. Rosa's saloon had become the unofficial town hall, where important decisions were made over honest whiskey and fair poker games. Pete's general store was now run by his grandson, who'd inherited both the old man's stubborn integrity and his talent for knowing exactly what people needed before they asked for it. The Morrison boys had built their own ranches, their children playing in the same schoolyard where their fathers had once learned to read. But perhaps the greatest testament to Elena and Jacob's legacy was something that couldn't be seen or touched: the knowledge that promises could be kept, that families could be built by choice rather than accident, and that ordinary people working together could create something extraordinary. The wooden ring Elena had carved still circled Jacob's finger, though his hands were more weathered now, marked by decades of honest labor. Her own rings, the gold band from her first marriage and the wooden band from her second, had become symbols of a truth she'd learned slowly: that the heart was big enough to hold multiple loves without diminishing any of them. As evening settled over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elena stood beside her husband on the porch they'd built together. 4 children had become 8 grandchildren, and the house that had once seemed too large for 2 lonely people now burst with the comfortable chaos of a family that kept growing through love rather than blood. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked, his arm warm around her shoulders as they watched their youngest grandson attempt to carve his first wooden horse under Tom's patient guidance. Elena smiled, thinking of all the broken pieces that had somehow been transformed into something beautiful. "Only that it took us so long to find each other. Maybe we needed those years to become the people who could keep the promises we made." The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the valley below, the bells of Silver Falls Church began to chime the hour. The sound carried clearly in the mountain air, a reminder that some promises echo across generations, calling people together long after the voices that first spoke them have been silenced. Some folks spend their whole lives waiting for someone to keep just one promise. Elena and Jacob Stone had learned that the greatest promises weren't the ones you received, but the ones you chose to keep, to love, to build, to stand together against whatever storms might come. And in that choosing, they discovered that home was never a place you found, but something you built, one careful stone at a time, with your own hands and the help of people who believed that some things were worth the risk of hoping for. The wooden horse on the mantelpiece caught the firelight, and for just a moment it seemed to move, not with life, but with the memory of all the love that had gone into its creation. A promise made, a promise kept, and a legacy that would endure long after the last echo of the iron bell faded into silence.